Hello everyone, this is Shannon from That's So Po, and today I'm doing a review of A Master of Djinn by Djèlí Clark, which is the first novel in his Dead Djinn Universe. This series has a couple of short stories, including A Dead Djinn in Cairo and The Angel of el-Khalili, as well as a novella, The Haunting of Tram Car 015, which precede this novel, but you don't need to read those in order to read this novel. So let me tell you what the story is about. The Dead Djinn Universe is an alternate history steampunk universe, and we are set in Cairo in 1912. 40 years prior to this, there was a mystic, al-Jahiz, who was able to open up a connection between Earth and the world that the Djinn and other magical beings inhabit. So Djinn now have come through that portal and live in Cairo as Egyptian citizens. This has meant that Cairo has really had a lot more power and advances in technology than it did in the actual real history timeline, and that changes a lot of the politics. In this Cairo in 1912, we follow Agent Fatma of the Ministry of Alchemy, Enchantments, and Supernatural Entities. And she is somebody who is dealing with a lot in this novel. So the first thing is that she is trying to uncover a mystery. There is a person who is claiming to be al-Jahiz returned, who has, by the way, murdered an entire secret brotherhood. And she is trying to follow up with that guy, figure out who he is, and really make sure that justice is enacted. She also is dealing with a brand new partner for her team at the ministry, who is a woman just fresh out of school, very bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and Fatma's not so into having a partner. Also, she is dealing with her girlfriend Sithi, who is absolutely lovely and wonderful, but very mysterious and seems to have some secrets. So now let me tell you about what I think this book did such a great job on, starting with the myth and the magic. This world is filled with so much mythology and so many different magical beings. We have all different kinds of jinn. So we have Ifrit, and we have Marids, and we have all of this different type of magic, illusion magic and fire magic. There are also other types of magic. So in addition to the jinn, there are sort of old Egyptian gods. And so many of those are working with and inhabiting a lot of modern people. We also have some European dignitaries that are visiting for a conference, and they have their own magic, such as different things that are kind of historically part of European magic. And there's, in a sense, a little bit of a magic Cold War race of arms for each of the countries is trying to compete with Egypt in terms of the power of the magical beings. So there's so much different magic in here, and I love the way that it also explores a lot of the history of myths related to the different jinn. It's really fantastic. The next aspect of this book that I thought was just outstanding was the history and the politics. Djèlí Clark does an amazing job when he talks about history, because I think he's a history professor. And so this is just filled with so much fascinating history. This really takes place right before, in the real world, World War I. And so one of the things that is happening in this story is that there is a conference where Egypt is trying to help a lot of European powers negotiate peace and keep peace. And this is, again, lots of tensions building up at this time in Europe. And so there's so much in here about all of that kind of history, and there's so much as well about politics. There's a lot in here about the way that different groups are treated, about prejudices, about the way that women are treated as well. So in one of the previous stories in this universe, The Haunting of Tram Car 015, that centered around the suffragette movement and women in Cairo getting the vote. And so there's a lot of things that Fatma, as a female agent, has to fight against in this world. So there's a ton of politics in this that really help flesh out the world and make it full of depth. I love those aspects. Another aspect that I thought was so cool about this story was the personal growth of Fatma. So Fatma is somebody who is in many ways incredibly progressive and very, very cool. She wears European style suits, has a love of fashion, is kind of a dandy, and she really bucks against tradition in so many different ways. She's very modern, and she is very much somebody who is advocating for herself and for what she's doing, and yet she has a lot of areas that she needs to grow. She, despite being progressive in many different ways, is still held back by a lot of prejudice and a lot of traditional beliefs in other ways. So in this world, even though most of the people in Egypt are Muslim, there are people who worship the old Egyptian gods, like Ra, things like that. And there's a lot of prejudice against them, sort of religious differences. And she falls into that. That's very hard for her to overcome and for her to realize that people have different beliefs and that's okay. Similarly, even though she advocates for herself as a professional woman so much, her new partner, Hadia, is somebody who maybe on the outside looks slightly more traditional. You know, she wears the hijab and she prays very actively and all of these sorts of things. And in the beginning, Fatma is very much judging her and really, in a sense, holding her down because she views her as too traditional of a woman. So there's so many different areas where Fatma has to grow, and I love how this story explores that and explores somebody who is so kind of boundary breaking in a lot of ways, so progressive, and yet still has so much to do. So I loved that aspect. And the last thing that I want to talk about is actually one that didn't work as well for me, and that is the pacing. So Djèlí Clark, I think, is the master of novellas. This is his first novel, and I think that there's still some kinks for him to work out. I found the pacing in this to be okay, but not great. Not in the way that he paces his novellas, which are just so consumable. This one I found, it just took a little bit of time to get through, and I think that it could have been tightened up a little bit. Additionally, the pacing of the mystery I found kind of frustrating. So I don't like mysteries where, you know, at the very end, the detective sort of reveals all of their special thoughts that you never could have followed. So a little bit of the Poirot or Sherlock approach. So I don't like that. But I also really prefer it if I only figure out the mystery just before the people in the story do. So maybe a couple pages or a chapter before. Maybe I have some suspicions, but I don't fully come together until right before it's revealed. In this book, though, almost everything that was happening, I figured out maybe half a book before the characters did. And so that led to a lot of frustration, waiting for them to figure it out, watching them go down the wrong trail, watching them interact with somebody and, you know, wanting to shout at them, no, you need to ask this instead. And maybe this is intentional in terms of what Djèlí Clark was going for. But as a reader, I found it a little bit frustrating. So the pacing in this, and especially the pacing for when things were revealed in the mystery, and when I figured it out before the characters, was just maybe not so much my style. Overall, I think that A Master of Djinn is such a fun book that is filled with a ton of excellent magic and world building and so much to say in terms of history and politics and prejudice. I really loved what this book was doing. It did have a little bit of issues in terms of that pacing, but still, it was such a great read. I really definitely recommend this entire series. You can start with this book if you like, not a problem. And I cannot wait to see what else Djèlí Clark writes in this world. If you guys have read this book, or if you've read any of the other works in this series, if you have any thoughts, any recommendations, anything at all, just leave me a comment down below.